1. Introduction. RAWSEP view: the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view: purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary. Episode 57 DGJ, April 10th, 2025. Whooping cough deaths and RFK coming after dental protective fluoride. In episode 57 DGJ 1, United States whooping cough deaths and RFK is coming after dental protective fluoride. 2 headlines. New York Times, April 9th, 2025. 3 United States Republicans in Congress, these super fans of Trump, are holding out against his budget. 4 Michigan Whitmer attacks the Trump tariffs but avoids attacking Trump at an event in Washington. 5 headlines. The Guardian, April 9th, 2025. 6 United States governors, Democratic governors, hit back at Trump order blocking state climate policies. In a joint statement, 7 United States health impacts mass layoffs at the Department of Health and Human Services HHS portend a future with more infectious disease outbreaks, chronic conditions, and a widening gulf in health between the most affluent and vulnerable. 8 Florida Trump tariffs go Trump. Florida shoppers back tariffs, but others are worried some Gainesville voters remain loyal to the Trump while others cut back on buying. And business owners hike prices. 9 Ireland, half the place would be blown to bits. The Irish villages under threat from the Trump tariffs. The corp pharmaceutical industry, vital to the local economy, is at risk as U.S. trade policies threaten small towns reliant on the sector. 10 European Union tariffs. EU drug companies warn of exodus to U.S. as Trump threatens import tariffs. Von der Leyen urged to take rapid and radical action as Trump says tariffs on pharmaceuticals coming shortly. The Irish villages under threat from the Trump tariffs. 11 Spain water revealed big tech new data centers will take water from the driest areas in the world. Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are building data centers in water-scarce parts of 5 continents. 12 Germany to send clear signal of strong effective government under new coalition, says Friedrich Merz, presumed future chancellor, says coalition has strong plan after negotiations as polling shows popularity of far-right AfD main content. 1 United States whooping cough deaths and RFK is coming after dental protective fluoride. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization, Hope Dementia, Measles, whooping cough, and RFK coming after fluoride. Your local epidemiologist. The dose, April 9th, 2025. It is Public Health Week. Send a note to your local health department. Many folks in public health will tell you this moment is even harder than the COVID-19 emergency, which is really saying something. Pulling the plug on public health infrastructure funding overnight is already having consequences. A few examples. Milwaukee The CDC response team halted work on addressing lead paint in schools. Dallas, Texas canceled Measles Mumps Rubella M vaccination clinics. A North Carolina study on post-Hurricane Helene health impacts was canceled, but these cuts are being met with resistance. 23 state attorneys general have filed a lawsuit to stop the $11 billion rollback in HHS funding that buys local health departments at least 14 more days of spending authority. The U.S. Senate Health Committee has invited RFK Jr. to testify about the cuts and his vision for public health this week. Note, it is just an invite. He does not have to attend. We will see. RFK Jr. said some programs were cut by mistake, including the childhood lead poisoning prevention program, and he may reinstate it. That might be a smokescreen, but I am choosing to hope that some version of this critical work continues, even if not through CDC. A federal judge has permanently barred NIH from cutting indirect costs to universities and academic medical centers. This is the money the federal government gives to researchers to keep the lights on at research labs. Here is a wily explainer. Of course, the administration is going to appeal this decision. But for now, this restores billions of dollars in grant money to medical research. Some good news: shingles vaccine may lower dementia risk. Dementia rates are decreasing for reasons not known in a solid cough. Federally funded study published last week, scientists found that women who received the shingles vaccine were 20% less likely to develop dementia. That is pretty incredible. The science here is fascinating. We are learning that some viruses may hang out in our bodies for years or even decades, quietly damaging the brain. Dr. Jen Dowd has a great explainer for a deeper dive into this study. Who should get the shingles vaccine? Adults ages 50 plus, anyone 18 plus who is immunocompromised. Note, it does not matter whether you have had shingles or chickenpox before. More good news: respiratory season is winding down. Flu season is mostly over, so we are pausing weekly updates for now. COVID-19 trends are still heading downward nationally, though we are keeping a close eye on the measles still spreading despite RFK Jr. talking points earlier this week. RFK Jr. claimed that measles cases had flattened, prompting CDC to pull their response team from West Texas. Then a measles-related death was reported, and the team was sent back. Cases are still rising, not flattening. As of this morning, the tally is 675 across the country. The largest outbreak remains in West Texas. 505 cases now spreading to New Mexico, 56 Kansas, 25 Oklahoma, 10 and Mexico, 100 plus. Colorado now has an infant case after traveling to Mexico, so technically this case is tied to the West Texas outbreak. Genetic testing needs to be done to make the link official. There is also an unrelated outbreak in Ohio, which is exploding. 10 cases last week, 25 cases today. Figure by your local epidemiologist. New sporadic cases from international travel in the past week include California adult in Coachella Valley, Michigan, a case in Macomb County, and another reported in Kent County, Washington. Snohomish County Health Department reported an infected infant after international travel. Colorado adult case. New Jersey non-resident had measles while traveling through the state. Check out more details from Wiley, New York. Indiana unvaccinated minor in Allen County. For more details on the outbreaks, below is the latest CITREP report as of last night from students at the Yale School of Public Health. What does it mean for you? If you and your family are vaccinated, you are well protected. If you live near an outbreak or have a child under 12 months, are immunocompromised or unvaccinated, keep an eye on local health alerts. Will measles become the new normal? It is likely. New data show vaccination coverage is slipping more than we thought. Until now, we have relied on 2 CDC surveys, one for kindergartners, one for kids under 3, but they are delayed and a bit outdated. A new analysis using health records from over 11 million children paints a clearer and more concerning picture. 30% of kids are not getting their first dose on time by 15 months on time. Coverage has dropped from 77% 2020 to 69% 2024. Even after 2 years, 15% of kids still have not gotten their first dose. There are limitations. Health records do not capture all kids, especially those without regular healthcare visits. But if anything, these numbers may overestimate actual coverage. What is the bottom line? We will see an increasing number of measles cases. There is a good chance we will lose our elimination status and measles will become endemic. If you are up to date on vaccines, there is very little risk to you. 2 preventable whooping cough deaths. Louisiana announced that 2 infants have died from whooping cough. Another vaccine preventable illness. Infants under 1 are at the greatest risk of serious illness or death because their immune systems are still developing. For context, there were 10 whooping cough deaths last year, so this is not too unusual, but it is preventable. Cases continue to rise since the mid-2000s. What does it mean for you? Make sure you and your kids are up to date on DTP. The diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, whooping cough DTP vaccine is recommended starting at 2 months of age with booster doses. To follow adults in close contact with infants should be up to date on boosters. Pregnant people should get vaccinated during the 3rd trimester. RFK Jr. is now targeting fluoride. Dental caries. Tooth decay remains the most prevalent chronic disease among children, yet as part of his Make America Healthy Again tour, RFK Jr. praised Utah for banning fluoride and said he plans to instruct the CDC to stop recommending it. A few important reminders: the CDC does not mandate fluoride or vaccines. It provides evidence-based guidance developed with outside experts. The CDC task force has recommended community water fluoridation since 2001. The CDC oral health team was fired last week, so it is unclear who he would even be instructing. And no coincidence, Geyer, yes, the guy who is now leading an autism and vaccine study for RFK Jr. published a new paper this week questioning the safety of fluoride. What does it mean for you? You can still check your local fluoridation status on the CDC tool while it is still online. I also suggest engaging with your representatives. Here is a Wiley explainer to help ground the conversation in evidence. Yale School of Public Health also has a good explainer. Bottom line, you are all caught up. If you stay healthy out there, love the Wiley team. Your local epidemiologist. Wiley is a public health newsletter with one goal: to translate the ever-evolving public health science so that people feel well-equipped to make evidence-based decisions. This newsletter is free to everyone thanks to the support of fellow Wiley community members. 2 headlines. New York Times, April 9th, 2025. United States gun owners are preparing for when all hell breaks loose. The New York Times, how the Musk and Trump are working to consolidate government data about you. The New York Times, is more protein better for you? Fact-checking claims on social media. The New York Times, Jared Isaacman, the Trump pick to lead NASA, calls Mars a priority in confirmation hearing. The New York Times, late night frantically tries to keep up with the Trump tariffs. The New York Times opinion, can Tim Cook save Apple from being crushed by Trump? The New York Times opinion, the all-female Blue Origin flight has nothing to do with feminism. The New York Times opinion, the return of the great American stomachache. The New York Times opinion, the Trump Gulag Archipelago. The New York Times opinion, the Trump lust for power cannot be satiated. The New York Times, stocks and bonds rattled as markets are rocked by tariffs. The New York Times, the House Republicans holding out against the Trump budget and tax cut plan. The New York Times, Trump tariffs and stock market live updates. Wall Street wobbles as trade war escalates. The New York Times, the Trump tariff goal is to eliminate trade deficits. Economists have doubts. The New York Times, what is the Trump tariff endgame? Recession fears grow. The New York Times, Wirecutter expert advice on how to navigate the new tariffs. Michigan Gretchen Whitmer attacks the Trump tariffs, but avoids attacking Trump. The New York Times, Europe luxury fashion brands are biting their nails over EU tariffs. The New York Times, Ukraine, Ukrainians more. Many killed in Russian strike near playground. The New York Times, China for US and China, a risky game of chicken with no off-ramp in sight. The New York Times, China opinion, we are playing with fire. The risks of the Trump tariffs on China. The New York Times, 3 United States Republicans in Congress, these superfans of Trump, are holding out against his budget hardline. Conservatives concerned about the deficit are among the Trump most stalwart supporters in Congress, but they say they cannot in good conscience back the budget plan he has endorsed. Representative Eric Burleson, Republican of Missouri, is one of about a dozen hardline conservatives who have said they cannot back the Republican Party budget blueprint to unlock Trump spending and tax cuts. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against would smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization, the New York Times, April 9, 2025. A two-term congressman from the Ozarks in Missouri is unequivocal about his support for Trump, but Burleson is also one of about a dozen hardline conservative Republicans who have said they cannot back their Republican Party budget blueprint to unlock the Trump spending and tax cuts, even as the Trump is imploring them to support it in a vote that could come as early as Wednesday. I see a not live with myself if I go back home, and I added more debt and deficits without any kind of correction whatsoever, said Burleson, a financial analyst who campaigned on bringing down the debt. GOP lawmakers have long shown Trump extraordinary deference, and at the outset of his second term have caved to him on critical votes after getting a personal call or finding themselves on the receiving end of a blistering social media post. They still may relent after Trump met with a group of House Republicans on Tuesday. A handful of holdouts dropped their opposition to the resolution, but their insistence that they would not support a measure without the promise of deeper spending cuts underscored the challenge for GOP leaders toiling to manage a group in their ranks who view reducing the debt as their North Star. The problem for Republicans like Burleson is that the level of spending cuts the resolution requires Senate committees to find about $4 billion over a decade is a fraction of the $2 trillion in spending cuts that the House has approved. House Republicans fear that if they agree to the Senate budget resolution, the Senate will ultimately force them to accept a far lower level of spending cuts than they want. Republican leaders have said that number is a minimum and is intended to give them flexibility to comply with strict procedural rules in the Senate. Hardline House conservatives are also unimpressed with the Senate insistence that extending the tax cuts that Trump signed into law in 2017 would cost nothing because it simply maintains current policy. Senate Republicans have adopted that approach so they could extend the tax cuts indefinitely without appearing to balloon the deficit. Their opposition was reminiscent of scenes that played out in December when Trump implored Republicans to pass a government funding bill that also raised the debt limit. Dozens refused during those negotiations. Trump singled out Representative Chip Roy of Texas, who was forcefully making the case against the legislation both in public and in private, and called for his ouster. Now Roy is again among the ranks of fiscal conservatives who are at odds with Trump. He attended the White House meeting on Tuesday, but left saying he was still opposed to the budget resolution. The math still does not math, Roy said. For Michigan, Whitmer attacks the Trump tariffs, but avoids attacking Trump at an event in Washington. Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan struck a more measured tone on the Trump trade war than other Democrats, seen as possible 2028 contenders. Tariffs need to be used like a scalpel, not a hammer, Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan said on Wednesday. In Washington, unfortunately, it is unclear how this is going to strategically benefit the American economy or the American consumer. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against would smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization, the New York Times, April 9, 2025. Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, one of the most prominent state leaders in the Democratic Party, warned in a speech on Wednesday that the Trump trade war could have calamitous effects, but was careful not to blame him directly. As she embraced a bipartisan message, Ms. Whitmer sought to thread a political needle, avoiding direct criticism of Trump or his administration, a notable contrast with the blunter attacks on Trump made by other top Democrats seen as potential presidential contenders in 2028. The party and its liberal allies won a $100 million contest last week for a pivotal seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, conducted the first mass street protests against the Trump administration over the weekend, and has shown strength in special elections. At the same time, the party has shown a growing consensus that its best path forward is not to make a Bill Clinton-style argument of harvesting the best ideas from both parties, but to mount fierce opposition to a billionaire class newly empowered by Trump. Ms. Whitmer appears to be taking a different approach. She warned that elected officials would get nowhere if they tried to harvest fury without a longer-term plan. We want leaders who are not just focusing on keeping us angry with one another, but where do we get to where we want to be? Ms. Whitmer said that is what I am talking about here. 5 headlines. The Guardian, April 9, 2025. World academic freedom in the U.S. is under threat. Universities of the world unite. The Guardian. United States Americans braced for era of uncertainty as Trump doubles down on tariffs. Trump tariffs. The Guardian. Democratic governors hit back at Trump order blocking state climate policies. U.S. politics live. Trump has transformed the American story. The Guardian. Dramatic sell-off of U.S. government bonds as tariff war panic deepens. Bonds. The Guardian. Experts fear rise in diseases as layoffs halt health research. Incredibly bizarre gaslighting U.S. healthcare. The Guardian. Fact check. Are U.S. tariffs really bringing in $2 billion a day as Trump claims Trump tariffs? The Guardian. Jimmy Kimmel. Somehow Trump has managed to transform the stock market into Kanye West late night TV roundup. The Guardian revealed big tech new data centers will take water from the driest areas in the world. Water. The Guardian. Tech Trump ties are starting to burn. Musk. The Guardian. Top U.S. companies spent 3 times as much on buybacks than on taxes after Trump tax cuts report. U.S. taxation. The Guardian. Trump brags world leaders are kissing my ass as tariff chaos rocks markets. Trump tariffs. The Guardian. U.S. against plan for levy on carbon emissions from ships leak suggests shipping industry. The Guardian. We are witnessing the destruction of science in America. Paul Darren Baini asks. The Guardian. Women should avoid all alcohol to reduce risk of breast cancer. Charity says breast cancer. The Guardian. California. There is so much beauty Artists celebrate California in the wake of tragedy. Art The Guardian Florida, Go Trump Florida, shoppers back tariffs. But others are worried Trump tariffs. The Guardian Massachusetts, 5 nurses from same unit in Boston hospital diagnosed with brain tumors. Boston, The Guardian Canada, as Trump ignites tariff war. A U.S. city is embracing Canadians with all its heart. California, The Guardian Ireland, half the place would be blown to bits. The Irish villages under threat from the Trump tariffs. Ireland, The Guardian UK, must improve trade relations with Europe amid U.S. tariff wars. Warns Reeves Politics. The Guardian UK and Europe bid to build the first research station in Europe on Atlantic temperate rainforest. In Cornwall conservation, The Guardian EU drops plans to hit American bourbon with retaliatory tariffs. The Guardian EU drug companies warn of exodus to U.S. as Trump threatens import tariffs. The Guardian EU to build AI gigafactories in €20 billion push to catch up with U.S. and China artificial intelligence AI. The Guardian China and EU retaliate against tariffs as Trump says great time to move companies to the U.S. Business Live Canada. As Trump ignites tariff war, a U.S. city is embracing Canadians with all its heart. California, The Guardian. Germany to send clear signal of strong effective government under new coalition, says Friedrich Merz. Europe Live. 6 United States governors, Democratic governors hit back at Trump order blocking state climate policies in a joint statement. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian, April 9, 2025. The Democratic governors of New York and New Mexico, Kathy Hochul and Michelle Lujan Grisham, who co-chair the U.S. Climate Alliance, a bipartisan coalition of 24 state governors committed to reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions, responded to the order targeting state authority. The federal government cannot unilaterally strip the independent constitutional authority of the states. We are a nation of states and laws, and we will not be deterred. We will keep advancing solutions to the climate crisis that safeguard American fundamental right to clean air and water, create good-paying jobs, grow the clean energy economy, and make our future healthier and safer. The executive order also targets the array of lawsuits that mostly Democratic-led states, cities, and counties have brought against oil majors seeking compensation for the ravages of climate change, such as rising tides and more frequent wildfires. These state laws and policies are fundamentally irreconcilable with the objective of my administration to unleash American energy, Trump said. In the order, they should not stand. 7 United States health impacts. Mass layoffs at the Department of Health and Human Services HHS portend a future with more infectious disease outbreaks, chronic conditions, and a widening gulf in health between the most affluent and vulnerable. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian, April 9, 2025. Further, they said the Trump multi-pronged attacks on American science represent a generation-defining experience, a new chapter in the boom and bust cycle of health funding, and a masterclass in branding as Trump and the Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. dismantle institutions in the name of improving them. I fear for the country, said a population health researcher and a family physician. Many people, not too fond of bureaucracy, may feel this big shakeup in Washington, D.C. is well overdue, but I do not know that people appreciate what is coming their way. Experts said they see the chaos, confusion, and upheaval from the ideological purge of basic research grants early in the Trump tenure to more expected layoffs at the National Institutes of Health as leading to shorter, sicker American lives. These are cuts that are not driven by a rational strategy to improve population health, said Wolf. This is all being done in the name of making America healthy again. That is the incredibly bizarre gaslighting that is going on. Scenes of confusion played out across the U.S. last week as Kennedy enacted a 10,000-person cut to the 82,000-person health department, an overhaul compounded by roughly 10,000 cuts made by billionaire the Musk unofficial Department of Government Efficiency and a $112 billion clawback of federal funds from state and local health departments. Experts said slashing the $17 trillion budget of the Department of Health and Human Services HHS is likely to starve the system of well-established interventions known to save lives. The impacts could ripple across decades in an indication of the chaos and confusion that has characterized the second Trump administration. Kennedy also told reporters that some HHS workers appear to be mistakenly let go and would be reinstated. Public health is this hidden field you have not seen as protecting you, said a female associate executive director of the American Public Health Association. She added that the best example of that is the Office of Smoking and Health, noting a cut made to the National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion last week. 15, 20, 30 years from now, there will be people who were smokers all their life. We will see the results of that in heart disease, cancer, stroke. More than 16 million Americans live with a chronic disease caused by smoking. All the experts that The Guardian spoke with expected an increase in infectious disease outbreaks from bird flu and emerging diseases abroad, which the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention CDC would no longer have capacity to investigate, to HIV, syphilis, measles, and tuberculosis. In just a few examples of the cuts, among those laid off were experts in lead poisoning who were helping the Milwaukee School District eliminate lead pipes from schools. One of the most common conversations I heard was, what is going to happen to my research? Who is going to carry this work on if I am not able to do it? Said a third-generation worker at the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety NIOSH who studies cancer in firefighters and described the office as pandemonium. She said workers at the Cincinnati, Ohio NIOSH branch gathered in hallways to wonder aloud who would take over the National Cancer Registry for firefighters once they were were laid off in June. Firefighters are exposed to a dizzying array of known and potential carcinogens and have cancer rates much higher than the general public. They are facing losing their livelihoods, losing their own job, and still their concern is, what about the NIOSH mission? Rather than address questions about the layoffs, Kennedy used the weekend to attend the funeral of a second unvaccinated child who died of measles in West Texas and promote improved treatments for the disease. He also urged the government to stop recommending fluoridated public water. As of now, the CDC recommends fluoride in water, though it is unclear how the CDC will carry out messaging about fluoridation. The Office of Oral Health was gutted last week. 8 Florida Trump tariffs, go Trump. Florida shoppers back tariffs, but others are worried some Gainesville voters remain loyal to Trump, while others cut back on buying and business owners hike prices. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization, The Guardian, April 9, 2025. In Gainesville, Florida, a small city in the north-central part of the state, small businesses and shoppers are bracing for the impacts of the Trump sweeping tariffs. The Trump administration announced a baseline of 10% tariffs on nearly every country in the world last week, with much higher rates on countries such as China, Taiwan, and Vietnam, and 20% tariffs on European Union countries. The tariffs are expected to increase prices on household goods, clothing, electronics, and groceries. The Budget Lab at Yale University reported the tariffs could cost the average U.S. household $3,800. As criticism of the tariffs has mounted, the White House has touted support for the tariffs from everyday Americans, and in Gainesville that message seems to have worked. For now, Make America Great Again, said a male electrical contractor in Ocala, Florida, just south of Gainesville. A retiree in Lakeland, Florida, added, go Trump. Samantha Gore, a stay-at-home mom in Interlaken, Florida, just west of Gainesville, repeated a claim from Trump that Canada has 250% tariffs on some products, though the truth is more complicated. There are also zero tariffs on thousands of metric tons of U.S. dairy that Canada imports thanks to a deal brokered by Trump in his first administration, and the U.S. dairy industry is not reaching the levels of import quotas on any dairy products to receive the maximum tariffs from Canada. However, a coffee roasting company based in Gainesville that supplies coffee to several grocery stores, coffee shops, and restaurants in the area was already anticipating having to hike prices as coffee costs had just hit a record high before the tariffs were enacted. Everyone that I have spoken to about these tariffs in our industry feels that the Trump chaotic Liberation Day tariff rollout is only hurting importers, roasters, and thousands of coffee shops across the country, which were already struggling due to the unprecedented rise in coffee prices and the uncertainty and disruptions created by the Trump first 3 months in office. The net result of the Trump short-sighted tax grab is inflation for consumers, destabilizing our supply relationships and added stress on thousands of coffee businesses that were already struggling. 9 Ireland, half the place would be blown to bits. The Irish villages under threat from the Trump tariffs. The Cork pharmaceutical industry, vital to the local economy, is at risk as U.S. trade policies threaten small towns reliant on the sector. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian, April 9, 2025. Just across the bay from the historic town of Cove, the last port of call for the Titanic in 1912 on her ill-fated maiden voyage, lies the source of some of the biggest lifesavers and givers in the world. Sildenafil, the active ingredient in Viagra medicinal compounds for the treatment of cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, Crohn's, and Parkinson's disease, all are manufactured within 2 miles of the deep port in County Cork. Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and their private wind turbines are the main attractions after more than 50 years. However, it is all under threat after Trump accused Ireland of stealing American pharmaceutical industry and vowed to force U.S. companies' jobs and taxes to return home. On Tuesday night, he renewed the threat, promising a major tariff that would send the pharma industry rushing back to the U.S., sending stocks of those U.S. companies in Ireland, across Europe, and India down. This has concentrated the minds of local politicians who have called on the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to visit the area. Pfizer, which declined to comment, has invested $7 billion in 3 plants in Ireland since the 1960s, according to its website, with $12 billion earmarked for an expansion in Dublin, which is not due for completion until 2027. One businessman who works in local factories were working on goals for 2027 and 2028. Biomarin had a sign outside its entrance referring to something completing in Q1 2027, underlining his point. I do not think they are going anywhere. If Trump does try to pull the plug, he is going to get a call from the bosses of people here. There is billions put into these places, absolutely huge amounts of training. The equipment, it takes 10 years to set this up, and people are still building and expanding here. So it will take 10 years to replicate that in the US, and Trump will be long gone by then. He said 10 European Union tariffs. EU drug companies warn of exodus to US as Trump threatens import tariffs. Von der Leyen urged to take rapid and radical action as Trump says tariffs on pharmaceuticals coming shortly. The Irish villages under threat from the Trump tariffs. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian, April 9, 2025. Pharmaceutical companies in the EU have warned of a risk of exodus to the U.S. as stocks in the sector slid around the world on the back of the Trump renewed threat to impose tariffs on U.S. drugs import. Shares for drug makers across Europe and India, another foreign drugs hub, slipped on Wednesday after Trump indicated further carnage was on the way. In addition to the 20% reciprocal tariffs on imports that kicked in overnight, a basket of European healthcare stocks fell 39% after opening to its lowest since October 2022, leading losses among sectoral indices on the region-wide. Stocks 600 down 23% in early trading on Wednesday. Shares in AstraZeneca were down more than 5%, GSK more than 4%, Roche 56%, and Sanofi was also down more than 5%. Pharma CEOs alert President von der Leyen to risk of exodus to the U.S., said that unless Europe delivers rapid radical policy change, then pharmaceutical research, development, and manufacturing is increasingly likely to be directed towards the U.S. It said a survey of its members last week showed that capital expenditure money pumped into manufacturing plants and R&D were the frontline risks. According to the association, 1,648 billion euros is planned by pharma companies in the EU between 2025 and 2029 over the next 3 months. Companies that responded Estimate that a total of 165 billion euros, for example 10% of the total investment plans, is at risk. It said. It added that the US was becoming a clear favorite for investment, with tariffs expediting that, potentially putting at risk hundreds of thousands of jobs among the 1 million directly employed in UK and EU and many more in academic and clinical settings. The US now leads Europe on every investor metric, from availability of capital, intellectual property, speed of approval, to rewards for innovation. The FBI said now, with the addition of tariffs, there is little incentive to invest in the EU and significant drivers to relocate to the US. The association presented von der Leyen with a 5-point plan, including strengthening incentives to locate intellectual property in Europe and the adoption of a worldwide set of rules to make it more attractive to place innovation and research and development in Europe. 11 Spain. Water revealed big tech new data centers will take water from the driest areas in the world. Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are building data centers in water-scarce parts of 5 continents. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization, The Guardian, April 9, 2025. With Trump pledging to support them, the 3 technology giants are planning hundreds of data centers in the US and across the globe, with a potentially huge impact on populations already living with water scarcity. Your cloud is drying my river. The Amazon 3 proposed new data centers in the Aragon region of northern Spain, each next to an existing Amazon data center, are licensed to use an estimated 755,720 cubic meters of water a year, roughly enough to irrigate 233 hectares, 576 acres of corn, one of the main crops in the Aragon region. In practice, the water usage will be even higher, as that figure does not take into account water used to generate the electricity that will power the new installations. Between them, the Amazon new data centers in the Aragon region are predicted to use more electricity than the entire region currently consumes. Meanwhile, Amazon in December asked the regional government for permission to increase water consumption at its 3 existing data centers by 48%. 12 Germany to send clear signal of strong, effective government under new coalition, says Friedrich Merz. Europe Live, presumed future chancellor, says coalition has strong plan after negotiations. As polling shows popularity of far-right AfD. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization, The Guardian, April 9, 2025. New German coalition to target issues that fueled rise of far-right. Merz says the key message to Trump is Germany is back on track. Merz suggests he could formally become chancellor in early May. German coalition press conference gets underway. German coalition deal reportedly agreed upon with a press conference this afternoon. Far-right Alternative for Deutschland tops federal poll in Germany for first time. The press conference announcing the coalition agreement included Markus Söder, leader of the CSU, Friedrich Merz, leader of the CDU, Lars Klingbeil, co-leader of the SPD, and Saskia Esken, co-leader of the SPD. Friedrich Merz said the new coalition will target issues that allowed for the rise of the far-right Alternative for Deutschland. Merz said the best response would be to improve German competitiveness globally, and he defended proposed cuts in civil service to reduce the federal administration by 8%, but not through hiring an Elon Musk here, who is doing things like these in Washington, but instead Germany, doing it in a socially acceptable, sensible, and measured way. The German coalition lists proposals on innovation, mobilization of funds for investment through a new Germany fund, and financial regulation reforms to reduce capital requirements for infrastructure projects. The new coalition promised extensive support for the German embattled automotive industry to promote electric mobility and electric vehicles as a push to cleaner economy. The coalition wants to avoid a trade conflict and will push for the reduction of tariffs. It also pledges to protect retailers from unfair competition from the Far East. I think they mean China, with a push for European standards. There are reforms of work and unemployment laws, including the push for a minimum wage of 15 euros in 2026 and to exempt overtime work from taxes. It also contains provisions on pursuing the goal of climate neutrality by 2045, supporting climate adaptation, and a push to use more renewable sources of energy. SPD in the preamble to the document says that the coalition commitment to NATO and the EU remains unwavering. The document says the coalition will provide comprehensive support to Ukraine with readiness to provide further support to Kyiv. It reaffirms the long-term prospect of NATO membership for Ukraine. The UK, even after Brexit, is also listed as one of the closest partners of Germany.
One introduction. RAWSEP view the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions. Yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut down and burn tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom. The Eco-Design Wood Stove and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view purple air PM2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.